So hi, it's Jay Fisher. In this video, I'd like to talk about how you go about analyzing financial outcomes of MIPS. We'll show using the Macromonitor dashboard tools. Let's go take a look. When you first enter your Macromonitor dashboard, you want to and you want to take a look at financials. Navigate to the Financial tab in the left-hand navigator and select 10 financials. If you want, you can close the left-hand navigator and you'll see the financial results of what's going on with your macro scenario. Let's walk through what all of this means and where it comes from. The, the system starts with identifying or stratifying your providers by how those providers eligibility is evaluated by MIPS. So you may have QPs, you may have a hospital facility based group, you may have providers that are going to be scored and submitted as individuals, whatever that eligibility categorization is. Well, each categorization will have a separate row. And the reason for the separate row is because some combinations of physician eligibility will have different financial implications. For example, QPs receive a fixed dollar amount or a fixed percentage that's paid out as a lump sum to all providers independently of their MIPS financial score. And so you'll see the QPs in terms of regulatory low, current result, target, and regulatory high are always the same and always will be. Everyone else, though, is variable based on their MIPS score. So let's talk about where those things come from. We start with a basic Medicare number that is drawn from CMSdata.gov. That's a public CMS database that pulls in the Medicare allowables and Medicare payments amount. For financial projections, we use the Medicare payments. And I'll show you in a minute each of the 14 providers what their dollar amounts come from. But this is something that we pull automatically. You really don't need to do anything to enable this. The first dollar amount you're going to look at is if you failed to submit altogether as a group, here's what your penalty would be. In this case, on $161,000 worth of Medicare payments, $14,000 worth of penalty. The other end of the spectrum is something called regulatory high. And what that does is it calculates based on the assumptions that CMS publishes in the Federal Register each year. The system calculates what's the maximum financial adjustment percentage that CMS is expecting and applies that against your Medicare payments. In this case, it's $4,790, or roughly 3 to 3.5% of Medicare payments. Target result is the number that we jointly come at as a result of looking at your quality measures and deciding what your quality score might be. So if I click on assumptions for financial results, in the case of this client, we were expecting to get probably something like a 90 point, 90 points in quality, 90 points in cost, and a perfect score on CPIA for a MIPS overall score of 91.5. That 91.5 points MIPS overall score is worth around $3,200. And the current column says, based on the quality measures as they're being scored and evaluated right now in the Macromonitor database, we're still in a penalty position. So we have a little ways to go to improve our scores even up to our target level. Now let's talk about where these Medicare numbers come from. I'm going to click over on this link called QPP Data Confirmation. The QPP Data Confirmation looks up for the clinic all of the providers that are in that clinic based on PCOS and CMS QPP. For each of those providers, it identifies how the provider is categorized by CMS, whether they're a QP or some other category. In this case, they're all hospital-based group or hospital facility-based group. And over here, we're evaluating the Medicare numbers that we pull from CMSdata.gov. So one of the flaws in CMSdata.gov is it aggregates Medicare payments by NPI. So if a provider works across multiple NPIs, then we have to do if a provider works across multiple NPIs, we have to do a little arithmetic to come up with what portion is allocated. And we generally do that by dividing the number of TINs that the provider works in. And on this particular client, they all work in just one TIN. Divide the number of TINs into their total Medicare payment amount, and then extrapolate out that this provider is going to be paid about $656,000 worth of Medicare payments. Now, again, this is based on the CMSdata.gov content, which tends to be about 2 years old. But anyway, these are the numbers that we're using to calculate overall Medicare financials at this point. So that's it, kind of the quick and easy about how we go about estimating your financial reimbursement. What are the inputs to the financial reimbursement? And then finally, if you believe that the CMS numbers are, let's say, overly aggressive or overly conservative, you can adjust this scaling base. So we predicted based on the 2024 CMS final rule that about a third of the providers in the country would be penalized, and so we're using a scaling factor of 0.33 that adjusts what this financial maximum amount is. If, for example, CMS were to say half of the providers are expected to be penalized, that would mean that there's more dollars to be in the pool. So if we click a 0.5, that $4,000 number jumps up to a 7,200. And so if you or your CFO wants to take a more conservative or a more aggressive approach on what you're expecting to get out of MIPS, you have the ability to customize it for yourselves right there. That's how the financials work.